I've never been good with goodbyes, but that morning, the sky seemed to be saying one on my behalf. The clouds were heavy and low, smearing gray across the prairie like they couldn't decide whether to stay or move on. I felt the same way, caught somewhere between leaving something behind and daring to want more. I was standing in front of the old barn, hammer in hand, a coffee gone cold on the fence post beside me. The door had been hanging crooked for weeks, the bottom hinge loose, the top whining whenever the wind pushed against it. It wasn't much of a job, but I needed something to keep my hands busy. Something to stop me from thinking about him. Wyatt. Even saying his name in my head made something tighten in my chest, like a rope pulled too taut. He was due to ride in any minute now, said he'd help me with the door before the storm rolled through. Typical Wyatt, couldn't let me fix something alone, couldn't resist a chance to tease me about my city hands as he called them. You hold a hammer like it's a pen, Noah, he'd said the last time. You're gonna bruise your own thumb clean off before you hit a nail straight. He wasn't wrong. I'd moved back to my late uncle's ranch 6 months ago, trying to make sense of what he'd left behind, and what I'd left behind when I'd bolted from this place 10 years ago. I used to be the quiet kid who read books on the fence rail, sketching the horses instead of riding them. Wyatt was the opposite, reckless, sunburnt, and loud in the kind of way that made silence feel too sharp once he was gone. We'd been best friends once. Well, he'd said we were. I'd believed it until I realized friendship wasn't supposed to feel like being set on fire from the inside out. A gust of wind rattled the loose boards, shaking dust loose from the rafters. I knelt, trying to wedge the hinge back into place, and that's when I heard the low hum of his truck engine cutting through the wind. I didn't have to look up, I'd know that sound anywhere. That old blue Ford had more rust than paint, but it ran like it knew Wyatt's stubborn heartbeat. He parked near the fence, killed the engine, and the sudden quiet made everything feel sharper. The crunch of his boots on gravel, the creak of the door as he swung it shut, the thud of my pulse in my ears. "Morning," he called, voice low and rough with that drawl he'd never lost. I turned, hammer still in hand, and managed what I hoped passed for casual. "You're late." He grinned, pulling his hat low over his brow. "You're early. One of us has to balance the other out." Same old Wyatt. The easy smirk, the glint of mischief in his eyes, that casual way he leaned against the fence post like he belonged to the land itself. Time hadn't changed him much except for the beard he'd grown, short, scruffy, and far too distracting. "You really gonna fix that thing before it collapses?" he asked, nodding toward the barn. "Trying to," I said, tapping the nail against the wood. "Figured I'd get it done before the rain starts." He crouched beside me, close enough that I could smell him, leather, hay, a hint of soap that didn't quite hide the sweat. My throat tightened. "Hand me the wrench," he said. I passed it to him, careful not to brush his fingers, though the air between us felt charged anyway. It had always been like this. Too much unsaid, too much pretending. He worked quietly, tightening the bolts like it was second nature. His hands were steady, sure, veins flexing with each turn. Mine, meanwhile, hovered uselessly, finding excuses to fidget with a nail or wipe non-existent sweat from my brow. "Still can't stand to sit still, can you?" he said, glancing up. "Guess not." He smirked, then looked back at the hinge. "City didn't change that." "City didn't change much," I said before I could stop myself. "Just me trying to." He paused, eyes flicking up again, softer this time. "You did change though. You don't look like the kid who used to follow me around to skin why the sky looked different after a storm." My face warmed. "I didn't follow you around." "You sure?" "'Cause I remember otherwise." He said it lightly, but something in his tone made it sound heavier, like he remembered more than just a kid tagging along. I busied myself by holding the door steady while he finished. When he stood, he wiped his hands on his jeans and tilted his head toward the pasture. "Storm will hit by sundown. You got everything inside?" "Mostly. Still gotta tie down the feed tarp." "I'll help." "You don't have to." "Yeah, I do," he cut in. "You just let it blow off again." I laughed, though it came out a little thinner than I meant. "You don't have to fix everything I screw up, Wyatt." He looked at me, then really looked. "Maybe I like fixin' things." The words hung between us, caught somewhere between teasing and truth. I didn't know what to say, so I looked away first, watching the dark clouds gather at the horizon. When he moved closer, it was subtle, a brush of his shoulder against mine, the warmth of him bleeding through the chill. "You all right, Noah?" he asked, voice low. "Yeah," I said, though it sounded unconvincing even to me. He studied me for a beat longer, then nodded like he'd decided not to push. "Come on then. Let's get that tarp before we both get soaked." As we walked toward the pasture, the wind kicked up again, pulling at our jackets. The air smelled like rain, like something was about to break open. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. The same old Wyatt, easy grin, wind-tossed hair, that slow, sure gait of his. But there was something else there now too, a weight behind his laughter, a kind of quiet that matched my own. I'd come back here to rebuild a barn, not to dig up whatever I'd buried years ago. But standing beside him again, hearing that familiar voice over the wind, I had the sinking feeling that this was one repair job I didn't know how to finish without breaking something first. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't want to. By the time we reached the pasture, the wind had started picking up in earnest. The tarp flapped like a wild thing, snapping and thrashing against the fence posts. Wyatt grabbed one corner before it could take off, laughing as the gust caught his hat and nearly sent it flying. "Damn near lost it again," he said, pressing the brim down and shooting me a grin. "You'd think I'd learn to keep a hand on it when you're around." "Why's that my fault?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He winked. "Trouble seems to follow you, Noah." Figured the wind got the memo. I rolled my eyes, but it was hard not to smile. That was the thing about Wyatt. He had this easy charm, like every word he said carried a piece of sunlight in it. Even when the clouds rolled in, he made the world feel a little less gray. We worked in sync without needing to talk much, pulling the tarp tight, tying it down over the feed sacks. His hands brushed mine a few times, rough skin against calloused knuckles, and every accidental touch sent a small spark through me. I told myself it was just the static in the air. When the last corner was secured, he leaned against the fence, catching his breath. His shirt clung a little from the humidity, damp at the collar, the outline of muscle beneath the fabric. I looked away fast, pretending to check the knots. "You remember when we used to camp out here?" he asked suddenly, eyes fixed on the distant tree line. "Yeah," I said quietly. "You'd tell those ridiculous ghost stories until I couldn't sleep." He chuckled. "Hey, I was trying to toughen you up. Scaring a 12-year-old with tales of headless ranchers doesn't count as character building." "Worked, didn't it? You still here, ain't you?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Guess I am." That was how it always was with us. Memories folded between jokes, small moments that held more weight than either of us said out loud. We'd grown up on neighboring ranches, spent summers racing horses, climbing windmills, sneaking into the river at night. I thought I'd outgrown those days when I left for college in Austin, but being back here beside him again, I realized how wrong I was. Some things never really left you. He reached down to pick up a fallen glove, tossing it my way. "You still write?" "Not much lately," I admitted. "Hard to find the words when everything feels stuck," he offered. I nodded. "Yeah. Like I'm waiting for something to start before I can move again." He studied me for a second, his gaze too steady, too knowing. "You always been that way. Waitin' on the right moment, the right sign. Sometimes you just gotta move, Noah. Storm or not." The wind gusted again as if on cue, and he smiled faintly, pushing off the fence. "We should head inside before it hits." We jogged back to the barn, the first drops of rain spattering against our jackets. The air was electric, the smell of wet earth rising thick and sweet. Inside, the light dimmed, filtered through the cracks in the wood as the storm began to roll in. Wyatt shut the doors behind us and exhaled. "Well, guess we're stuck here for a bit." "Could be worse," I said, setting my hammer down. He grinned. "Yeah. You finally admit you like my company?" "I tolerate it." He gave a mock gasp, hand over his heart. "What? You wound me." "Don't tempt me," I said, trying not to smile. He laughed, that low, familiar sound echoing off the rafters. He wandered around the barn, brushing his hand along the wood beams, pausing to look at the old tools hanging by the stall. "This place hasn't changed much," he murmured. "Neither have you," I said before thinking. He turned, brow raised. "That a good thing or a bad thing?" I hesitated. "I haven't decided yet." His smile softened, something quieter slipping into it. "You used to say I'd never grow up." "I think you still haven't," I said, though my voice came out softer than teasing. He took a few steps closer, close enough that I could see the raindrops clinging to his eyelashes. "And you used to look at me like that meant something," he said, almost under his breath. I froze, not sure I'd heard him right. "Like what?" He shrugged, breaking eye contact with a quick grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Like you were trying to figure me out." "I was," I said quietly. He chuckled, though there was a nervous edge to it. "Still trying?" "Maybe." A rumble of thunder broke the silence, low and close. The sound vibrated through the floorboards, through my chest. Wyatt looked up at the roof, where the rain had started to drum a steady rhythm. "Hope it doesn't flood the low stalls again," he said. "I fixed the drainage last spring, but you never know." "We could check it, make sure it's holding," I offered, more for the excuse to move than out of real concern. We grabbed a couple of flashlights and pushed open the smaller side door, the rain instantly soaking us through. Water streamed down our sleeves as we ducked around the side of the barn, crouching near the trench that ran along the foundation. "Looks good," Wyatt said, shining the light. "No overflow yet." "Yeah," I agreed, though I was watching him more than the water. The rain had plastered his hair against his forehead, darkening it, and his shirt clung to his shoulders, the fabric translucent where it met skin. I swallowed hard, hoping the rain masked the flush on my face. He looked up suddenly, catching my gaze. For a moment, neither of us moved. The sound of rain filled everything, drowning out thought. His eyes, blue-gray like the storm clouds above us, held mine, unflinching. Then he laughed, shaking his head. "You're staring, city boy." "I wasn't," I lied quickly. "Sure you weren't," he said, voice playful but softer now. We ducked back inside, dripping and shivering. He tossed me an old flannel from a hook near the door. "Here. You'll catch cold." I pulled it on. It was too big, smelled faintly of cedar and him. "Thanks." He sat on a hay bale, running a hand through his wet hair. "You remember when that roof first leaked? We must have been 16. Rain came pouring in and you panicked about your sketchbook." "I didn't panic," I said, indignant. "I just didn't want to lose the drawings." He grinned. "You climbed up there barefoot in the middle of a thunderstorm, Noah. That's the most reckless thing I've ever seen you do." "I didn't have a choice," I protested. "You just dared me." He laughed so hard he doubled over. "Yeah, and you actually did it. Damn, I forgot how stubborn you were." "Still am," I said, smiling despite myself. His laughter faded into something gentler. "Yeah," he murmured. "Guess I like that about you." The words caught me off guard. He said them simply, like he was just stating a fact, but they landed heavier than they should have. My chest tightened. I pretended to busy myself by wringing out my sleeves, but I could feel his gaze on me, steady, unhurried. The storm outside deepened, rain hammering the roof in relentless waves. Thunder cracked close enough to shake the barn walls. The power flickered once, then went out, leaving us in the dim yellow light of the lantern Wyatt had lit earlier. "Well," he said after a beat, "guess we're really stuck now?" I smiled faintly. "Good thing we've got shelter." He leaned back, stretching his arms behind him, completely at ease despite the storm raging outside. "Could be worse ways to spend an evening," he said. "Like what?" He looked at me, eyes glinting in the lantern light. "Like alone." I didn't answer right away. There was something in the way he said it, something that made the space between us feel smaller than it really was. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain. Every so often, our shoulders brushed when one of us shifted. Each touch lingered longer than it should have. I tried to tell myself it was just the cold, the confinement, but deep down, I knew better. At one point, the wind forced one of the doors open just enough for rain to spray in. Wyatt stood, pushing against it, muscles straining as he fought the gust. I joined him, and together we shoved it closed, slamming the latch into place. When it finally clicked, we both exhaled, breathless, standing far too close. His hand stayed on mine longer than necessary, both of us soaked, the air humming with something neither of us dared to name. "Thanks," he murmured, voice low. "For what?" "For staying. And though he meant it about the door, or the storm, or maybe the ranch, I felt the weight of what he didn't say. Outside, the thunder rolled on. Inside, the quiet between us was louder than anything I'd ever heard. The power never came back that night. The storm settled in for the long haul, pounding the roof in relentless waves, seeping through the cracks until the cold air bit at our skin. I'd lit a second lantern from the old emergency kit, but even its glow couldn't chase away the chill. The temperature had dropped fast, the kind of biting cold that made the wood groan in protest. Wyatt kicked off his boots, rubbing his palms together for warmth. "This storm's worse than they said," he muttered, glancing toward the door. Rain dripped through one of the seams in the roof, pattering into a shallow puddle near the haystack. "We'll be fine," I said, though my voice came out thinner than I intended. He looked over at me and smirked. "You always say that when you're not sure." He wasn't wrong. I shifted on the hay bale, hugging my arms around myself. The flannel he'd given me was still damp. Wyatt noticed. "Come on," he said, nodding toward the back of the barn. "There's a couple of blankets in the tack room. Might be our best shot at staying warm." I followed him through the narrow corridor between stalls. The air smelled of hay and leather, sharp and familiar. He found an old chest against the back wall and pulled it open, tossing me a heavy wool blanket before wrapping one around his shoulders. We set up near the far corner, away from the worst of the drafts. The lantern light threw soft gold against the walls, and the rain outside became a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat just beyond reach. He sat cross-legged across from me, the blanket draped over his shoulders. His hair was damp, curling at the ends, his face half-shadowed by the flickering light. "Not exactly the evening you planned, huh?" he said. "Guess not. Though I can't say I hate it." He tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly, like he was trying to read between my words. "You used to hate being stuck anywhere. Always needed an escape plan." "Still do," I admitted quietly. "Just, not tonight." His expression softened. That's so." I shrugged, fighting the urge to look away. "Maybe I don't mind the company." He smiled, slow and genuine, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and made my chest ache. "Well then. Guess I'm doing something right." We talked for a while, about the ranch, the town, the years we'd lost in between. It felt easy at first, like slipping into an old rhythm, but every now and then our laughter would fade into something heavier. A glance held too long, a pause that lingered just a breath too deep. At some point, the wind outside shifted, howling through the gaps. A draft swept through and I shivered despite the blanket. Wyatt noticed instantly. "Come here," he said, scooting closer and lifting the edge of his blanket. "No point freezing to death just to prove you can handle it." "I'm fine." He rolled his eyes. "You're shivering, Noah? Don't argue." Before I could think better of it, I slid closer, settling beside him under the shared blanket. The warmth of his body hit me like a spark, solid, radiating, steady. My pulse kicked up hard enough I was sure he could feel it. "There," he said softly. "Better?" "Yeah," I managed. My voice sounded strange, smaller, too careful. We sat in silence for a bit. The storm seemed to close in, wrapping the world in sound. His shoulder brushed mine, his hand resting loosely near my knee beneath the blanket. Every movement felt deliberate, though I knew it wasn't. Wyatt never noticed the small things that killed me. At least I thought he didn't. He glanced sideways, his breath brushing my temple. "You're quiet tonight." "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how easy this feels," I said before I could stop myself. He blinked, surprised. "Easy?" "Being around you," I said, forcing the words out before they could choke me. "After all this time. It's weird, right? Shouldn't it feel different?" Wyatt studied me for a long moment. "Maybe some things don't need to change," he said finally. I wanted to believe that. God, I did. But sitting there, close enough to feel the steady rhythm of his breathing, I knew things had changed, at least for me. He shifted slightly, his thigh brushing mine, his arm brushing the back of my hand. It was nothing, probably accidental, but it sent a rush of heat through me that no storm could touch. I tried to focus on the rain, the creak of the rafters, anything but him. "You ever think about leaving again?" he asked suddenly. "Sometimes." He nodded slowly. "You always had that look. Like you belong somewhere else." "I don't know where that is anymore," I admitted. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Could be here." I turned to him, surprised. "Here?" "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "Ain't nothing wrong with staying put. You don't gotta keep running. His words hit deeper than I expected. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. The space between us seemed to hum. He must have felt it too because he looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. "Didn't mean to get all sentimental," he muttered. "Guess the storm's got me talking stupid." "It's not stupid," I said quickly. "It's honest." That made him look back at me, eyes catching the lantern light. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt charged, fragile, like one wrong word might break it. He smiled faintly. "You always see more than I want you to." "I can't help it." "Yeah, you can," he said softly. "You just don't want to." The silence that followed was heavy, full of all the things I didn't dare say. I wanted to reach out, to close the small distance between us, to see if what I felt was real, but the thought of losing what we had froze me in place. So I stayed still. So still it hurt. Another gust hit the barn, rattling the doors. Wyatt glanced over, then back at me. "You should get some rest," he said, his voice rough. "Long day tomorrow." "I doubt I'll sleep through this," I murmured. He chuckled quietly, pulling the blanket tighter around us. "Then we'll just wait it out." And we did. For a long time we just sat there, listening to the rain, breathing the same air, too close to be casual and too afraid to move apart. At one point, I felt his head dip slightly, his shoulder brushing mine in what could have been a shift or something more. I didn't look at him, didn't breathe too loud, afraid the moment would vanish. But when his hand brushed mine again, this time it didn't move away. It stayed, barely touching, just enough to make my pulse roar in my ears. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. Because if I did, I knew I'd forget every reason I'd ever had to keep my distance. And I wasn't sure I'd find them again. The rain finally began to ease sometime after midnight, tapering into a slow drizzle that whispered against the roof. The air inside the barn had grown warmer from our shared body heat and the flickering lantern, but it didn't make the silence any easier. Wyatt hadn't moved his hand from mine. It was just there, steady, casual, almost like he didn't realize what it was doing to me. I wanted to pull away, to say something, to laugh it off, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't listen. It was caught in that unbearable space between wanting more and being too afraid to want it at all. He broke the silence first. You ever think about those summers we used to spend down by the creek? His voice was quiet, rough-edged, like the words scraped coming out. Yeah, I said softly. Every once in a while. He smiled faintly. You'd sit on that rock sketching everything in sight and I'd try to get you to swim. You'd say the water was too cold and I'd call you a coward. You'd push me in anyway. He chuckled, his thumb brushing the back of my hand. You always forgave me too easy. That's because you always said sorry, I murmured. He laughed once, short and low. Guess I did. Then quieter, maybe not for everything I should have. The air shifted, just slightly, but enough that I felt it in my chest. He wasn't talking about the creek anymore. I turned to look at him. The lantern light caught the lines of his face, the stubble, the faint scar on his jaw, the soft uncertainty in his eyes. What do you mean? He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. Just, there's things I wish I'd said before you left. Things I thought I'd get another chance at. Like what? He huffed a laugh, eyes dropping to our joined hands. You really want to go pokin' at old ghosts tonight? Maybe I do, I said. Seems like they've been pokin' back for a while. He stared at me for a moment, the corner of his mouth twitching in what wasn't quite a smile. You always did talk fancy when you got nervous. I'm not nervous, I lied. He leaned in a little, his voice soft but teasing. Sure you ain't. My throat felt tight. I wanted to look away, but he was too close now, close enough that I could see the small flecks of green in his blue eyes. The same eyes that had followed me through 100 memories I'd tried to forget. He sighed, breaking the moment before it swallowed us whole. You know, when you left for Austin, I told everyone you'd be back in a year. I almost was, I admitted. Yeah. Missed the place, I said. Missed home. I paused. Missed you. He froze, his hand tightening slightly on mine before letting go. Don't say that unless you mean it, Noah. I do, I said quietly. I always did. He looked away, jaw flexing like he was fighting something back. You don't know what you're saying, Dot. Yes, I do. He stood suddenly, pacing a few steps toward the door, running a hand through his hair. You don't. You've been gone too long. You've got a life out there, people who... Wyatt, I interrupted, standing too. My voice came out firmer than I expected. Stop telling me what I feel. He turned to me, eyes flashing. Then tell me, damn it. The storm might have been gone outside, but it was still roaring between us. I took a breath that trembled in my chest. I left because I thought it would make it easier. This place, it all got too hard to look at. I told myself it was because I wanted more than this life, but that wasn't it. It was because I couldn't stand being near you and pretending it didn't mean anything. Wyatt didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring like the words had knocked the air out of him. I tried to forget, I went on, voice breaking. God, I really did. I dated people, threw myself into work, told myself it was just a stupid crush on my best friend, but it never went away. And then when I came back and saw you again, it was like it never stopped, he said quietly. I swallowed hard. Yeah. He exhaled slowly, like he was letting something go he'd been holding for years. You got no idea how many times I wanted to say something, he said finally. But you were leaving, and I figured if I told you, it'd just mess everything up. You'd go, and I'd be stuck here wondering if I'd ruined the best thing I ever had. You wouldn't have ruined it, I said. You might have saved it. He gave a small, broken laugh. Too late for that now. No, I said. I stepped closer. It's not. Wyatt looked up at me, then really looked. His eyes were bright and raw, like every wall he'd built had finally cracked open. You don't know what you're a skin, Noah? I'm not a skin anything, I whispered. I'm just telling the truth. He stared for another heartbeat, then shook his head slightly, like he didn't trust what he was hearing. You sure this isn't just... Wyatt, I said again, his name coming out like a plea. Stop thinking so much and just feel it. For a second he didn't move. Then something in him broke. He took one step forward, then another, until he was close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath against my cheek. His hand came up, hesitating in midair before settling against the side of my neck. His thumb brushed along my jaw, tentative, like he was afraid I'd pull away. I didn't. You sure? He murmured. I nodded, the word catching in my throat. Yeah. The distance between us disappeared. The kiss wasn't perfect, too much hesitation, too much pent-up ache, but it was real. It was soft and shaky and years overdue. His hand slid to the back of my head, pulling me closer, and I melted into him before I could stop myself. Every fear, every what if I'd carried cracked apart in that moment. When we finally broke apart, we stayed close, foreheads touching, both breathing like we'd just run for miles. I shouldn't have waited this long, he whispered. Then don't wait anymore, I said. He let out a shaky laugh, thumb tracing slow circles against my skin. You always did have a way with words. And you always did need someone to shut you up, I murmured, managing a small smile. He laughed quietly, the sound half broken, half relieved. Guess you got me there. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, leaving only the faint dripping from the eaves. The storm had passed, but the world still smelled new, clean, alive. Wyatt rested his head against mine, his voice barely above a whisper. So what happens now? I don't know, I admitted. But I want to find out. With you. He was quiet for a long time before saying, You really mean that? I nodded. Yeah. I'm done pretending. He smiled then, the kind of smile that reached right into me and settled somewhere deep. Good, he said softly. 'Cause I don't think I could go back to pretending either. We sat there in the quiet that followed, his arm finding its way around my shoulders, the two of us wrapped in a warmth that had nothing to do with the blankets or the lantern light. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running from something. I felt like I was finally home. And maybe that was the unexpected thing about Wyatt. It wasn't that he'd kissed me. It was that he'd made me realize I'd been waiting my whole life for him to. For a long while neither of us spoke. The lantern flickered, and the rain's steady drip outside filled the silence. We were still sitting on the floor, knees touching, his arms slung loosely around my shoulders. Every so often his thumb would trace idle circles over my sleeve, as if he was testing whether I was still there, still real. I turned slightly toward him. You okay? Wyatt gave a small, crooked grin. Reckon so. Just trying to wrap my head around the fact that I finally kissed you. You sound surprised. I am, he admitted. Been thinking about it so long I figured it was just one of those stupid things a man keeps tucked away, you know? Like old letters or broken spurs. Well, I said, leaning a little closer, guess you can throw those away now. He chuckled, a low, warm sound that rumbled through his chest. Careful, I might get used to you talking sweet like that. Would that be such a bad thing? Wyatt looked at me, his smile turning softer. Not even a little. The storm had left the air heavy and clean, and the smell of rain mixed with hay and the faint scent of him. Soap, leather, and something that felt like memory. Every detail seemed magnified. The way his lashes caught the light, the warmth radiating from his side, the creak of the barn settling around us. He exhaled, long and shaky. Feels strange, doesn't it? Finally saying it out loud. Strange, I said, and kind of terrifying. He nodded. Yeah. Guess we both been hiding behind jokes and chores for so damn long. I smiled. You're the one who hides behind jokes. Oh, you think you're subtle? He teased. You stare at me like I'm the last sunset on the prairie, Noah. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks. You noticed that? Hard not to, he said with a grin. You ain't exactly sneaky. I swatted his shoulder, laughing, and he caught my wrist mid-swing. His hand stayed there, fingers curling lightly around mine. The humor faded into something quieter. Still not sneaky, he murmured. For a moment we just looked at each other, the world reduced to breath and heartbeat. Then he leaned forward again, slower this time, his lips brushing mine in a soft, unhurried kiss. It wasn't desperate like before, it was steady, sure, a promise instead of a question. When we parted, I rested my forehead against his shoulder. So what now? He let out a long breath. Guess we figure it out. I ain't good at this kind of thing, but I want to try. I pulled back to meet his gaze. Try what, exactly? Us. He said it like the word was still new in his mouth. If you want that. I do, I said immediately, then hesitated. But it won't be easy. The ranch, the gossip. Small towns remember everything. Wyatt shrugged, his hand finding mine again. Let him remember. Folks round here got enough to talk about anyway. We'll give him something worth whispering. I laughed quietly, shaking my head. You make it sound simple. He smiled. Ain't saying it'll be simple. Just saying it'll be worth it. His words sank deep, steadying something inside me I hadn't realized was still trembling. We sat like that for a while longer, trading stories in the lantern glow. He told me about the years I'd missed. The new calves, the drought, the time he tried to build a chicken coop and nearly burned down the shed. I told him about the city, the noise, how every place I lived felt temporary. Somewhere between the laughter and the soft pauses, the distance of 10 years shrank to nothing. When I started to yawn, he nudged me gently. Come on. You look about ready to keel over. And sleep where? The floor? He glanced toward the hayloft ladder. Up there. Dry warm. Plenty of room if we stick close. Stick close, huh? I said, raising an eyebrow. He smirked. Purely for warmth, city boy. Sure. He climbed first, lantern in hand, the golden light trailing up the rungs. I followed, trying not to notice the way his jeans fit as he moved. The hayloft was cozy, the roof low and the floor covered in old bales that smelled sweet and clean. Wyatt spread the blanket out and dropped onto it with a satisfied sigh. See? Not bad, he said, patting the spot beside him. I lay down next to him, the hay rustling beneath us. The rain had quieted to a faint mist outside, and the crickets were starting to return. The calm after the storm. For a few minutes we just listened to the night. His hand found mine again in the dark, fingers tangling easily. You know, I said quietly, I think I'm finally glad that damn barn door broke. He laughed softly. Guess I oughta thank it. Don't you dare, I said, smiling into the dark. He turned on his side to face me. The lantern cast a faint halo around him, catching in his hair and turning his eyes to liquid amber. You sure you're staying? He asked. I don't know what comes next, I said honestly. But I'm not running anymore. I think I'd like to see what happens if I stay. Wyatt reached out, brushing his knuckles along my jaw, slow and tender. Then I reckon I'll make damn sure you've got a reason to. The way he said it, quiet, steady, felt like more than a promise. It felt like a beginning. I closed the distance again, pressing my lips to his. It was softer than before, unhurried, the kind of kiss that settled deep instead of burning bright. When we broke apart, I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm beneath. He chuckled low. You always did find ways to keep me up late. Get used to it, I murmured. He tightened his arm around me. Wouldn't have it any other way. The barn creaked around us, wind slipping gently through the rafters. Outside, the fields glistened under the moonlight, the storm washed clean away. For the first time in years I felt settled, not trapped, not restless, but exactly where I was supposed to be. Tomorrow there'd be talk. There'd be questions, maybe even doubts. But tonight, in the quiet heartbeat of the barn, with Wyatt's warmth pressed close beside me, the future felt wide and open, like the prairie after rain. And for once I wasn't afraid to meet it. The morning came soft and golden, sunlight filtering through the cracks in the barn boards and dust motes dancing lazily in the air. I woke to the slow rhythm of Wyatt's breathing beside me, his arm heavy across my waist, his hat resting crookedly over his face like he'd meant to block out the dawn but fell asleep halfway through trying. For a moment I just watched him, the way his lashes curved against his cheeks, the faint stubble along his jaw, the relaxed line of his mouth. He looked younger like this, softer, stripped of all the quiet strength he wore like armor in daylight. And somehow, impossibly, he was mine now. I smiled to myself and shifted slightly, careful not to wake him, but the motion made the hay rustle and his hand tightened around me. Mornin'? He mumbled, voice rough with sleep. Morning, I whispered back. He tilted his hat up just enough to meet my gaze. You look better with sunlight on you, you know that? I snorted, trying to hide the way my chest warmed. You're laying it on thick already, huh? He grinned, slow and lazy. Just speaking truth, city boy. I shook my head, but I didn't move away. There was something grounding about that morning, about waking up here in this barn that had seen so many versions of us. The reckless kids who dared each other to climb the hayloft, the quiet men who rebuilt what was broken, and now, whatever we were becoming. Wyatt stretched, the movement graceful in its unhurried confidence. Storm's gone, he said, listening to the still air. Reckon the creek's full again. Could take the horses out later. You mean together? I asked, pretending casualness, but my pulse jumped anyway. Course together. You think I'm letting you fix more barn doors without supervision? I laughed, tossing a bit of hay at him. That was one time. He caught it easily, still grinning. And it changed everything. The words hung between us, soft but undeniable. I met his eyes, and something in me steadied, like the fear that had shadowed me all these years finally let go. We left the barn sometime mid-morning, after cleaning up and making sure the horses were fed. The ranch stretched out before us, sunlit and impossibly wide, the fields shining with dew. The air smelled of wet earth and promise. Wyatt walked beside me, our shoulders brushing occasionally as we made our way toward the main house. Every now and then our hands would graze, and neither of us pulled away. When we reached the porch, he stopped and looked out across the land. "You remember that summer we spent buildin' that fence line down near the river? How could I forget? You made me haul half those posts while you supervised." He laughed, low and genuine. "You complained the whole damn time. And you loved every second of it." He turned toward me, smiling in that quiet way of his. Maybe I did. For a moment, silence settled again, comfortable, full. The kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Then he took a slow breath. "So what happens now?" I leaned against the railing, thinking. The question had followed me all my life, through cities, jobs, heartbreaks, but now it felt different. Lighter. "I guess we just live it," I said. "See what it looks like day by day. Fix things when they break. Keep choosing it." Wyatt nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds about right." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small piece of wood I'd split from the barn door the day before. It was smooth now, sanded down, the jagged edge gone. He held it out to me. "What's this?" I asked. "Figured you might want something to remember yesterday by." He smiled just a little. The day everything finally made sense. I turned it over in my hands, the texture warm from his pocket. There was something deeply simple about it, ordinary wood, yet it carried everything that had changed. "You're kind of a sap, you know that?" I said, trying to keep my voice light even as my throat tightened. "Only for you," he replied. I looked up sharply, half expecting him to laugh it off, but he didn't. His expression stayed open, steady. And for once I didn't hide either. "Good," I said softly. "Because I think I might be one too." Later, after breakfast and the quiet bustle of chores, we saddled the horses and rode down toward the creek. The water shimmered in the sunlight, the current strong from the night's storm. We stopped near the edge, letting the horses drink while we sat on the fence rail. "Place looks different in the daylight," I said. Wyatt nodded. "Everything does once you stop running from it." I studied him, the line of his jaw, the way his hand rested near mine. "You ever regret staying?" He shook his head slowly. "Nah. This land's got a way of keeping me honest. And now," he glanced at me, "now it's got another reason to feel like home." I looked down at our hands, still close but not touching. My fingers twitched before I finally gave in, sliding mine into his. His thumb brushed the back of my hand once, then stayed. "Guess we're really doing this," I said quietly. "Guess we are," he murmured back. The breeze picked up, carrying the scent of rain and sagebrush. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out, and the world felt impossibly vast, but not lonely anymore. That evening, as the sun dipped low, we stood by the barn again. The repaired door hung straight and sturdy, the fresh wood pale against the old frame. Wyatt leaned against the post, watching me with that same quiet amusement he always had. "So," he said, "you still think you're any good at fixin' things?" I smiled, stepping closer. "Only the ones worth keeping." He reached out, tugging me gently by the front of my shirt until we were chest to chest. "Then I'd say you did a damn fine job." The kiss was easy this time, familiar already, the kind that didn't need permission. When we finally pulled apart, the sky was burning orange and gold, the last light catching in his hair. "Stay for dinner," he said. "After that we'll ride out. Show you what the stars look like when you ain't got city lights to drown 'em out." I grinned. "You trying to impress me?" He winked. "Is it working?" "Yeah," I said. "It really is." He laughed softly, wrapping an arm around my shoulders as we started toward the house. The air was cooling, the smell of rain giving way to wood smoke and distant cattle. As we walked, our hands brushed again. This time neither of us hesitated. Our fingers found each other easily, like they'd been waiting years for it. The barn behind us stood fixed and solid, the first of many things we'd rebuild together. And ahead, the field stretched endless under the fading sun. It felt like standing at the edge of something vast and certain. Not an ending, not really, just the start of a story we were finally brave enough to live.